Good morning. Welcome everybody to our clinical research update, lowering risk and leveraging COVID lessons. You're going to learn today about our organization and also about the clinical research cohort that we've been developing for about the last year. We do this for a number of reasons, and one is that it's a wonderful career for a scientist. It's also, and just a very, very smart, very, very well organized person. It's also critical to the development of new therapies. And in our region, there's a lot of activity. We have drugs being developed, devices being developed, diagnostics being developed, et cetera, et cetera. So understanding how all of those get through the clinical research process is pretty important. How about that? So Westchester Biotech Project was founded in 2017. I'm going to let my friend Michael Welling speak about himself and his origin story in a moment. But really our idea is to bring people together across all the different silos of biomedical research, development, patient care, population health, and move forward together. We have three basic umbrellas, our career consortium, and this program is part of that. It looks at all different aspects of building a career as a scientist of any kind. We are building our data analytics hub with an emphasis on microbiome research. That's a really interesting program. And our Blueprint 2030 is looking at what's the world we want to live in. And through working with numerous partners, we've developed the concept of science economy. And with just one E, because that stands for everyone. And how do we really support the building of the science economy? These are just some of the meetings that are coming up, and you're probably familiar with the concept of kintsugi, the whole idea of you take something that might be broken, not that I'd ever say anything that ever happened to us was a break, but taking things that are broken and putting the pieces together to make them even more beautiful. We've all been through the ups and downs of COVID. We've been able to stay pretty active. Everything's been online, and it probably will be online until we're hoping that our March event, our innovation in research, which is going to have a focus on maternal health, I'm hoping that that's going to be able to be physical, but we'll decide that around January. But that's a really interesting program where we bring people together from different parts of our community to share what they're working on. It probably won't be a full day if it's online. I don't want to torture anybody that much, but if we can meet in person, it will be. And the what's next is that a lot of our programs come from somebody like you saying, I'm working on this thing and I'd like to share it. Or I have this problem and I'd like to talk to other people that are working on the same thing, et cetera, et cetera. So we really encourage you to be in touch with concepts, presentations you'd like to give. And we have kind of a rolling call for abstracts about any topic relating to biomedical research. Thank you. And Michael, I'm going to turn it over to you at this point. There's like just one or two more slides, but obviously we don't do this alone. Michael is our co-founder.
Thank you, Joanne. Thank you, everybody. Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening. As I know we have friends joining us from around the globe. Joanne mentioned we don't do this alone, and that's true. And I know that both the sort of fervent pace at which we put out these programs and the seamless presentations that you all participate in seem like it's a snap of a finger. In fact, it's just the opposite. We've got folks working behind the scenes tirelessly to bring these programs to you. And I just want to acknowledge both my partner in this, Joanne Geer, Denise Albit, and Matt Bedenko, who, again, without their tireless efforts and chasing you all down, this stuff doesn't happen. And I just want to appreciate them for all their work and making us look so good when we put this together. You know, just reflecting on the last 18 months and COVID, and certainly I hope all of you are healthy and well, and your families as well. You know, I think that we've all experienced highs and lows that may have been directly related to COVID, but at minimum, we all experienced those indirectly related to COVID. And this concept of kintsugi, which Joanne mentioned, was something someone had shared with me, and it really sort of made my head sort of pivot 180 degrees and got me looking at opportunities, not as, oh man, this has been rough and how bad and how we didn't get through this, and start looking at things with, wow, man, that was tough, but let's now find all the positive things we can pull out of this, and not let us look back in 2 years, 5 years, 10 years and say, man, we really just sort of, stumbled and tumbled and spiraled out of control, and rather, hey, we stopped, we took control, we created something even more beautiful than perhaps we envisioned originally. And just one small example of that is today's event, where yes, we were ahead of the Zoom curve in doing online events before that was in vogue, but having pushed all of our events online really allowed us to explore new topics and bring in new partners and new individuals to share in our conversations. And while I'm not going to spend a lot of time on sort of how I came to being in this world, certainly for those who know me know I am not a scientist. I am not a researcher. While I appreciate data, I'm not a data engineer either. But I was brought to this world, the world where I talk about the art of medicine meeting medical science and sort of, confronting patient need head on through a personal experience in my family with my now 15-year-old son. It's a happy ending story, but that's what really brought us to the creation of the Westchester Biotech project. Truly driven with the purpose of bringing together people like all of you for the purpose of sharing ideas and fostering collaboration. And there's been a ton of that has come out of the last 18 months that I'm not honestly sure would have happened if we weren't forced into how we existed and coexisted and interacted over the last 18 months. So many of those interactions are represented on the slide here. Some of our program collaborators, and these folks, again, without their support, and that support runs the gamut from financial support to thought leadership support to actual leadership support to content support and everything in between. We're not here and we're not doing what we're doing. And I always encourage people to read through this list. If there's a name on there that you think might be a good collaborative partner for you, please reach out and let us make the introduction. We really value that role that we can play. You might see one of these names on here, just have an idea you want to float by them. We welcome that interaction as well. And of course, you might have some program collaborator envy and want to see your name up here. We welcome you reaching out and talking about what role can you play here. One of our really important tenets that Joanne and I have pushed since day one is this is a two-way street. Every name up here, yes, they've contributed invaluably to us, but we can also say that we've contributed invaluably to them, whether it's making introductions, creating a platform for sharing ideas, you name it. So if there's a value there, we want to explore that. And that's really how we see our organization differing from many other organizations. This is a true partnership and two-way street. So obviously, you know Joanne, now you know myself as well. And again, we are always looking for help, assistance, contributions. So while, yeah, you see our names up there, really, it should have everybody's name on there as far as who's contributing and who's supporting. And I think that's a critical thing to note about, again, how we are structured. And as we sort of talk about what today's topic is, lowering risk, which is critical, I think, in any type of engagement, medical or otherwise, but leveraging COVID lessons. And that goes back to this idea of this kintsugi. What have we learned? What painful and valuable lessons have come out of the last 18 months that we should not forget, but rather we should highlight and champion and make sure we don't forget as we move out of this and apply these lessons to other areas, whether it be clinical research, whether it be drug development, whether it be medical device creativity. We think you're going to hear some really insightful and exciting feedback today, both observations of the last 18 months, but also some of the really exciting and amazing things that are coming down the road. And anyone doesn't leave today inspired and excited and optimistic about what the future holds, then you weren't paying attention. You should go back to our YouTube channel and rewatch it, because I assure you that will be the outcome there. So it is my honor, my privilege to introduce someone who is one of our golden sponsors, but more importantly has been a dear friend to Joanne and I and our organization from the onset, and I think who represents all that is good in our global economy, trying to create relationships across borders, trying to share missions and align interests, to put together partnerships and opportunities that push everybody forward and make everybody better. So without further ado, unless Joanne has more ado, I am excited to introduce our friend and partner, Fritz Hanke from Montero Language Services. Fritz?
Well, thank you very much, Joanne. Thanks, Michael, for your nice words, and good morning to everyone. I'm excited to welcome you all on behalf of Montero and, of course, of Westchester Biotech. That makes it possible for us to gather you all, guys. Hopefully, next time and after COVID, definitely, we will see each other in person in a real conference. I will love it. I would like to show up to all of you only one slide, the slide which you are seeing that explains the workflow in our company when a project comes in. Just look at how many people get involved in this process. The workflow TEP stands for translation, editing, and proofreading. Just look at it and look. There's a project manager involved who receives and evaluates the project. There is an engineering department which is responsible for the technicals. There's a translator, or more of one translators, depends on the volume of the project. We got a reviser, and at the end, the proofreader. So once again, the project manager, when it finishes, has to check the quality. The project will be delivered to the customer, and there is an update from our engineering department of the translation memory and the term base after the client's validation. I hope you appreciate, really, this is not a difficult process, but it involves really many people of different professional skills. I wish you a very good meeting today. I'm really excited, and I will pass over to Denise, who will explain the importance of our white paper related to clinical research. Thank you very much to all of you.
Romina, welcome. How are you?
Thank you so much. It's very exciting to be able to bring this perspective of plain language and clear language, and to maybe clarify some issues around it. So
where are you, first of all?
I am in Monterey, California. I originally moved here to teach at the Monterey Institute, now the Middlebury Institute of International Studies. And we loved it. And even when I stepped away from academic life, I stayed.
Well, thank you. Welcome.
Thank you. And this is just a few of the things that I'm involved in, for those of you who don't know me. And I think one of the most relevant now is I am doing research on plain language and the effects on different audiences, and developing standards in the language industry. So I'm bringing this idea of communication being a multifaceted interaction, and the idea that plain language needs to be part of the conversation. And we're developing actually the principles. This is my mnemonic so far for every time that I communicate, whether it's with peers or with the general public. I want to make sure I'm using these principles. I'm selecting the content, I'm providing different points of access, I'm making it grammatically correct and logically correct, and I'm making it accessible, which we're going to see some examples, and definitely testing. And we're going to look at a couple of options for testing. And this is important in the world of health literacy, which very timely, we had last year the finalizing of comments for the new definition of health literacy, which no longer is an individual skill, but is the ability to enable that individual skill. So now Healthy People 2030 has this new more comprehensive definition in place. So one of the things that I want to show you, there we go, is one of the big areas of application of plain language for the general public is lay summaries of clinical trials. And this is has been increasingly important with regulations like Regulation 536 in Europe, and we'll have upcoming regulations in the US to communicate with the public. So this is just an example of a clinical trial that was translated into plain language and then translated into other languages. And there's no need to read anything, it's just a visual example. So the idea of plain language is bringing clarity and empathy together. And how do we do that? And why do we do that? We have skill levels that are interestingly dipping in the population. I'm sure you're all familiar with the IQ curve. It has it was shifting to the right throughout the 20th century, and now it's shifting back to the left, which is a problem. And we have a big gap between IQ even and health literacy as measured by international and national surveys. And we also have the need to be situational. Health literacy, somebody with high literacy in general may have bad news and not understand what they're being told. So we really need to pay attention to that. And we have more and more data from neurosciences that stories are told in the body. So we need to appeal to this idea that we are social beings and we want to communicate empathetically. So what is plain language? The definition from the International Plain Language Federation is language in which writing structure and design help readers find, understand, and apply information. So we can go from a wall of text to something that is well written, that has structure, and that has formatting, and that has design. And my personal quest is to make sure that people understand plain language can be used everywhere. Plain language is not just about citizen communication. We can apply the principles of plain language to technical communication, to communicate with peers, and to communicate across disciplines, and also to communicate with people with disabilities. So the interventions that we can have in writing structure and design require also that we have testing. One of the big words in the plain language community has been for a while readability formulas, not applied to a variety of instances, including search engine optimization results. And that's a problem because readability formulas are just a quick temperature check of a text. So we need other ways of getting feedback. One of my personal favorites is the idea of teachback, which interestingly, I think we can use not just with patients, but among each other. And I use this also this mnemonic PARCA for remembering the steps to present the information, to answer questions, to restate that information, make sure that we understand, that the interlocutor understands, and ensure that this process is iterative until the accurate understanding is achieved. And this can help us write better as well. So some of the examples, little things that happen within the text that can make us trip over text. We need to look at what happens in the sentence. We need to look at what happens with terminology, particularly outside of technical jargon. If we are translating technical jargon, we need to be careful about the overall context. In this case, we have a triad of terms that works great, but then if we add more terms, we need to switch our translation for the public. Beyond the sentence, I like to think about clarity in terms of two axes. One has to do with whether it's technical or lay text, but the other one has to do whether it's obscure, poorly written. And so a lot of times when we try to communicate with the public, we go immediately to jargon translation, and that's not enough. We want to go to a clear technical text first, and then go to a clear lay text. And you can see here, this is, oh, excuse me. Let's see. This is just highlighted a couple of terms that you can read. You don't need to read the whole text. In terms of structure, we want to think about all of the possibilities of organization and definitely use all the wonderful technology that we now have available to create layers that we can use to access the text in different points. And in terms of design, whether it's technical or lay, again, we can go from design that requires a lot of cognitive load to design that is a lot more streamlined and more easily grasped. To add empathy, one of the big hot topics lately is bias-free language, which simply means to bring objectivity to our communication. And it is based, the last edition of the APA, the American Psychological Association's Manual of Style, bring this to light to apply relevance, specificity, and intersectionality to our talking about our communities, particularly in research, how we talk about race, gender, disability, etc. Because we can create, and this is something I edited recently, false categories in a study about spina bifida. The writer didn't want to use normal people or people with spina bifida, so they coined the unconventional people, which makes things worse. We need to define terms. In this case, low may be very confusing, so we need to refer to specific definitions of it, for instance, the poverty line at the federal level. And we need to remember that people don't belong to just one category. We have very many roles. So we need to make sure that we pick the ones that are relevant. These are just some examples of this. Some communities we need to focus on the person, but in other communities we need to focus on the identity, particularly in terms of disability. Definitely being mindful of focusing on positive terminology and objective descriptors versus biased descriptors, and undocumented and illegal is one that has come up a lot during the pandemic. Parallel comparisons, so that we don't mix and match categories, and definitely define minorities versus kind of bag them all together and creating confusion. And so to close up, I want to show you something we worked on for, and this is for a transitional residence, and how we can go from a very formal and authoritative text to something that is much more humane and acknowledges the humanity in the person. This is related. This was a new residence that arose because of the pandemic. So it is something that has touched people very, very recently. And just the difference between the all caps and the tone, the imperative versus the ability to talk to the person. So these are just some examples and some options to keep in mind. And with that, I will say thank you.
So we're now going to move on to our panel. And Nora and Maria and Paloma, would you put your cameras on? Nora, would you like to introduce yourself?
Thank you, Joanne, and hello, everybody. My name is Nora Diaz, and I am an English to Spanish translator and conference interpreter. My role in clinical research within the entire chain of things that need to happen for clinical research to be successful is I translate patient-facing materials, and I am also a linguistic validation consultant, which means that when documents get translated for one specific country, let's say for Argentina, and they need to be adapted, for example, to Mexico, which is where I am, then they need to go through this process that includes what we call, there's at least 4 steps: forward translation, by several translators, reconciliation of the translations to make sure that we get the best translations on the document. Then we do a back translation that is usually checked by whoever originated the documents, and to make sure that the translation is really conveying what is intended in the original document. And then we do something with that is called cognitive debriefing, which is interviews with patients where they are asked to look through the documents and tell us if there's anything that doesn't sound right. Because as linguists, sometimes we are in the middle and we might tend to be too formal, or to use register that is too high for patients, or there might be some cultural issues in the translations. And so during this one-on-one interviews with patients, during these cognitive debriefings, they have an opportunity to do exactly what I heard some of the previous speakers talk about. We make the process patient-centric by asking them to tell us what they think. We'll listen to their voice so that that information can be integrated in the documentation that is then used for the trials or for just general documents that are used in doctors' offices. So thank you very much, Joanne, for the invitation to be here. And I think I will now leave the floor to my co-panelists to introduce themselves.
My name is Maria del Sagrario. I'm from Mexico. I'm from southern Mexico, particularly from Oaxaca. This is a very culturally diverse state in Mexico. We have about 16 languages approximately. So everything that is all the information that is let's say relevant, for Mexican citizens should be translated into those languages. Well, all over the country, not only in Oaxaca, of course, but I'm focusing on Oaxaca because this is my background. I'm here. I was invited by Joanne and Denise and all the team, in a role as a spokeswoman of the work that organization of translators and of indigenous and translators and interpreters, related to, of course, this COVID pandemic. Well, so the document that I am displaying here is like a summary. It's in Spanish, but I'm going to tell you what it's basically about. This organization that I just mentioned is called CEPIADED, and which stands for like a Professional Indigenous Center for Translation, Consulting, and Defense, something like that. They basically are focused on helping indigenous peoples in Oaxaca, but well, that was like the beginning, and now they are like doing this work all over the country in Mexico with all indigenous peoples that we have. So one of their activities is providing translators, indigenous translators and interpreters, especially for example, court processes, like what would you say, court process, trials, but in terms of coming back to the topic of COVID, well, they participated during this last 2020, last year, it was like a call by private organizations. Wait, I can find this is it. This is like series of private organizations that released this call for projects related to social projects, no, which have some impact, no, in terms of the COVID pandemic, and they participated and they carried out this project of translating information, no, about the first, what I call like the first stage or the emergency, no, need of information at the beginning of the pandemic, no, and basically this is what they did, no. This document shows or focuses on the work they did in Oaxaca. This is the state, no, this is Oaxaca. So as you can see, we have different regions, and in each different region, we have different indigenous peoples. So we're talking about, for example, they translated material into 12 out of 15 indigenous languages. As I told you at the beginning, we have a lot of languages here in Oaxaca. And of course, we're not only talking about one linguistic variant in each language, we have a lot of variants in each language. So as you can imagine, we have 176 variants only in this state. So the work they did was really important, really relevant, no, at the beginning. Of course, because of this, the resources, they got the resources to do this, to pay translators, to pay for the interpreters, because of these organizations that I just mentioned, no, these private organizations. But that was like the beginning of the pandemic, and the problem is that in terms of the vaccines, no, they didn't get any resources, any support, no, to spread information about this, because one of the members of this organization was telling me that they were, authorities from communities demanded the information, no, about vaccines, because they wanted to inform the people, no, in order to so they could make a decision about being vaccinated or not, but they didn't get the information in their languages. So this is like a big information gap that we experience, no, all over the country in terms of this stage, sorry, of the pandemic. So basically, that's what I wanted to explain, to tell you, to share with you. And well, I don't know, maybe we may have some questions later. Thank you.
Thank you, Maria. And the profound investment that needs to be made to really communicate significantly on an ongoing basis it's a real challenge. Paloma.
So my name's Paloma Layfeld. I am a physician. I have a background in preclinical research, my master's in biopsychology. So cultural challenges didn't really exist with our mice models in research, but I'd argue that cultural competency is of the utmost and most importance in clinical research. I work at Goodness Growth Holdings. We're the only physician-led, physician-founded medical cannabis company, and we have a robust clinical research portfolio, hoping to really expand that as well. And I'll talk a little bit about that, but cannabis has been weaponized in Black and Brown communities in the United States since the 1930s. So it's really of the utmost importance that we right the wrongs by anti-prohibition, by descheduling cannabis, but also by providing quality clinical research with that in mind, providing health equity and really making cannabis accessible to everyone. Okay, so I always like to show this at the beginning. This is research that was done in the 60s that really shows how much our perception differentiates cross-culturally. When we talk about culture, we're not just talking about race and ethnicity, we're talking about so many other factors here. This was a study that was done in Aboriginal Australia tribes versus Western Europeans and Americans. On the bottom, it's known as the Muller-Lyer illusion. And the task is to bisect that big line right there. And Western civilizations tend to be more skewed towards the right side of the line, while Aboriginal tribes in Australia have it more at the midpoint. And that's because we see things very differently in our environments. So again, if we're perceiving lines this differently, just imagine how clinical research differs cross-culturally. The one at the top, I love cognitive illusions. I could talk about them all day. The one at the top is the Sanders parallelogram. Those two lines are actually equal, but the way that depth perception is cross-culturally, again, allows us to perceive the lines differently. And that's because from the last 50 years, we call them weird outliers, Western educated from industrial rich democracies. And this is what we've been sampling for the past 50 years. They make up 12% of the world's population, but have been used in 80% of research participants. So how the heck can we apply this information to the human species as a whole? It's wrong and it's not accurate. And by 2050 in the United States, over half of the population is going to be minorities. So again, clinical research needs this now. And that's why at our company, being physician-led, we know how important it is to really bridge those gaps, to really make culture competency, accessibility, health equity of the utmost importance. I'm just going to talk about one of our studies right now. It's our $3.8 million NIH grant for the use of medical cannabis to reduce opioid use in a particular population. One of the reasons that Dr. Chinazo Cunningham started this is because the Bronx is one of the most diverse areas in the United States, and they have zero access to medical cannabis. It's both cost prohibitive, location prohibitive, and that's incredibly unfortunate. Not only have Black and Brown communities been persecuted against because of this plant, but they now do not have access to it. And again, one of the most diverse areas in the country. And our research provides these individuals with a medical cannabis for the price of $1. It's New York. The average cost of medical cannabis for a patient, because it's not covered by insurance, can be upwards of $300 each visit. And compare that to opiates, which kill 113 people every day, which you can go to any pharmacy and pay $6 for. So again, we really wanted to make note of this incredible health disparity, this lack of equity in this population, and make medical cannabis products available to them through our clinical research. And again, this is just highlighting really that, a third of these individuals fall below the federal poverty line. When we talk about health equity, this isn't just lack of financial funds. These people suffer more from environmental hazards. And don't get me started on psychological burden. I mean, it's incredibly unfortunate that they're unable to access this product, which really has the potential to work so well for chronic pain. And so cultural competencies are really of the utmost importance, but cannabis research comes with a bevy of other ones. And, we're really dedicated to, number one, cultural competency, but also really fighting all of these other issues that come up with medical cannabis research. Number one being it's a Schedule I substance for no reason. I'll be on record saying that, meaning it has no medical benefit at all. And we've served over 100,000 patients that says just the opposite. And I'll finish with this quote right here from the man, Bill Murray. The most dangerous thing about weed is getting caught with it.
Thank you. Thank you, Paloma, and thank you, Maria Sacrario, for those great introductions. And so we're now going to move on to a couple of questions in panel form so that we can discuss this issue of cultural challenges and linguistic challenges in clinical research. And let me start by saying that as I was listening to the other speakers who spoke before us, I was thinking of some very interesting things that happen and that we hear about constantly. So, for example, Nanny Fan said that patients from different cultural backgrounds eat different foods, have different habits, and that critical information should be shared between stakeholders. And of course, linguistic barriers are an important factor to consider when it comes to that, because not only do we have different languages, we have different ways of living life, and so people understand things differently. Just to give you a quick example, most of the clinical trial documentation that comes across my desk for translation talks about 7 days. So in the past 7 days or in the next 7 days. In Mexico, at least, for the Mexican population, the concept of a week is not 7 days, but rather 8 days for some strange reasons. So that's one of the things that we have to keep in mind and consider. So when you do a translation of these types of materials, you have to keep in mind all of that cultural baggage that comes with it. I also heard Daria say that clinical research, and this really, I think is very powerful, starts with the patient, ends with the patient. There is no clinical trial without patients. And so, again, that's very important because when it comes to recruitment, cultural differences may play an important role. And when it comes to compliance or retention of patients, that's also very important. It's also almost a running joke among the Spanish-speaking community in the United States, for example, where children, there are all these memes going around where people say, I was 10 years old and my parents asked me to be their translator and their interpreter for important medical matters. And so I would ask you, would you trust a 10-year-old, regardless of what culture they're from, what language they speak, to relay important medical information to an adult, to understand it, first of all, and to relay it to an adult? So my first question for the panel would be, what is the importance of using professional translation and interpretation services when it comes to relaying the information that is, that is out there for clinical research? So Maria and Paloma, if you would like to take that question, is it important to use professional linguistic services, or can anyone just relay that information?
For example, in the case of indigenous languages, there is, the first issue is the professionalism of translators and interpreters, because they, for a long time, bilingual people have been doing this work without any opportunity to work as professionals. To take translation or interpreting training. But they have been basically forced to do it because somebody has to do it. No? Nowadays, for example, this organization, CEPIADET, is really worried about this, about training people to do professional translations and interpreting work into the indigenous languages. And it is very important in terms of in the case of these languages, because as I mentioned before, we have a lot of variants, linguistic variants. So it's not only one language and one variant. So we have one language and maybe 15 variants. So sometimes, for example, authorities for trials, I'm talking about court trials, they say, okay, so you speak Zapotec, so come here, you can help me. But they don't know that the person they need this interpreter for speaks another variant, a different variant. So there's no understanding. So that's why it's very important that first of all, a professional translation or interpreter can do the job, but particularly this person knows or speaks the variant of the language that is needed.
Right. Thank you. Thank you, Maria Sagraria. For the field of clinical research in cannabis, for example, Paloma, is there anything that you'd like to add as to the interaction with professional linguists?
I think professional linguists are a necessity, but really I see them as only the start of achieving competency. There's so much more when it comes to cross-cultural interaction. Right.
Okay. Well, when it comes to, and I'm thinking, of course, I work with the Spanish-speaking population, and I'm actually located in Mexico. So this is when clinical trials come to Mexico, and I also do a fair amount of translation for the Spanish-speaking population in the United States. And one of the areas that, and perhaps this would be relevant also for cannabis research, one of the areas that also come into play is the acceptance of the various areas of research. So willingness to participate in clinical trials is easier. It's easier to recruit patients from a Hispanic background for some sorts of trials than for others. So for example, and this comes with cultural implications that have to do with shame that is attached to certain things, or not wanting people to know that you're interested in or participated in certain things, like, for example, mental health clinical trials. The Hispanic population is very reluctant to participate in those. Are there any other cultural aspects that interfere? For example, now with COVID and vaccination, as we heard from Maria Sagrario about people not having access to information about vaccination and the reluctance to get vaccinated in some circles. Is there a cultural aspect that plays into that as well? What kinds of things, for example, among indigenous peoples, are there some factors that would prevent them from accepting vaccination, for example? And what kind of information needs to get to them or needs to flow to them to help the process?
Well, first of all, I would like to say that, I mean, these peoples have like, a long time practice of their particular way of healing any kind of disease they have known. So the first aid for them is those practices, when they got a disease, and this is like these cultural practices. So when they were faced, when we were faced in general with this sudden situation of a pandemic, so the first thing they did is they closed their towns. I mean, people were not allowed to go out or come into the communities because they didn't know exactly what might happen. So they heard news of the city. So we better stay here and we don't go to the city, but we don't allow anybody else to come into the community. So that's the first measure they took. And then it's culturally relevant as well to think about the way they make decisions. I mean, yeah, you may think, yeah, but they are individuals and they may take, each one of them may take their decisions. But in terms of, at least here in Oaxaca, I'm talking about what I know, decisions are taken primarily in an assembly, by the community. So that's why I mentioned before that community authorities demanded information because they wanted to share this with the people and to come into a decision of, yeah, we're gonna get vaccinated or not. So that, but if they didn't get that, so they couldn't decide. And that's why in the second, well, let's say this year, not in 2020 because they were mostly closed, the communities, but nowadays this year they opened and we had some really red spots of contagion. Yeah, I mean, a lot of people from the communities got the disease, and they didn't get like the resources to come into the city, for the hospital. So there were really huge problems because of that. So as you can see, I mean, it's a lot of things have to be taken into account when we're talking about different cultures. And just one last thing that I would like to mention, sometimes abroad, I mean abroad, out of Mexico, no, they hear Mexican people, okay, so everybody are the same, no? Everybody speaks Spanish, but we have a lot of cultures and here within this geographical space. So that's a suggestion that I would like to make. Take into account this one. We are not exactly one people. We are hundreds.
We even have that in Westchester. This has been really great. I just want to give Paloma and Nora an opportunity for a last comment, and then we're going to move on.
Yes. Well,
Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
no, you go ahead.
Thank you. Well, first of all, I just want to thank Maria and Nora so much for sharing this panel with you. It's nice to virtually meet you both, and Joanne and Denise for having me join you both. Just with that last question, I think it's incredibly imperative for COVID and for medical cannabis that we talk about in cultural differences in distrust for the government. And that's not something that we should shy away from. It's something that is a legitimate concern and something that we must address. Cannabis is such a stigmatized plant, and it should not be stigmatized. And their participants said, why do I need to get my card? Why do I need to participate in research when I've been buying this on the street and it's been working for me for 50 days? So that's education that we do not shy away from, and we really need to speak about as well. Because again, we call it the so-called war on drugs, because it was not a so-called war on drugs at all, but it was really a plant that was weaponized against certain communities in the United States. Looking forward to hearing everyone else today.
Thanks, Paloma. Great to meet you. Welcome aboard.
Joanne, can I just make one comment? I just want to make sure everybody heard that Paloma quoted Bill Murray at the end of her initial presentation, which that's probably the only thing I understood in this whole discussion today. But I thought that was pretty cool. I wanted to highlight that.
Thank you very much.
I just wanted to say thank you, Joanne and Denise, for putting this together. Thank you, Paloma and Maria, for sharing this panel. It was great to hear different perspectives. And to everyone, just I would like to leave you with this little seed, this little idea of the importance of keeping cultural differences and linguistic differences in mind whenever clinical research is organized. So thank you very much.